Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Jessel Podcast. I'm Ernie Raposa, and I'm here with Karen Willenbring. And today we're talking about job loss and how to cope with that, how to manage through that. Karen is an integrative medical physician who practices in Erie, Pennsylvania. One of her special interests of focus is addressing stress and burnout in healthcare workers through a combination of integrative medicine and coaching. Karen's also working on her CTI coaching certification. So congratulations to you, Karen, on that. Welcome.
Thanks. It's good to be back.
Yeah. And yep, Karen, you've been on some panels with us talking about various topics out there. I think the last one you were on was quiet quitting. But for folks that haven't seen you there, why don't you tell us a little bit more about your journey and what the heck integrative medicine is?
Sure. So integrative medicine is a specialty that just is more new. I think it started with board certification in 2012.
Yep.
But it focuses on really treating the whole person and looking at all of the things that impact our health and taking time to really delve into those and address those. And so it dovetails into family medicine because family medicine physicians often, are managing all of that. But we take it to a deeper level, and it's just an exciting way to approach patient care. So
Yeah.
I actually came at it through family medicine. Family medicine for 20 plus years, and I kind of felt drawn to being able to have more time to take with patients and to look at things from all different perspectives, including
Yeah.
stress, which we'll be kind of talking
Yeah.
about here.
Right. Right.
But it just takes it to the next level. And each integrative medicine physician comes at it from whatever their background experience is. So I happen to have transitioned into integrative medicine and started a micro practice with one other partner, Dr. Greg Coppola.
Mm.
And we're just a small practice. It's he and I, and then his wife Michelle is our nurse, and that's our entire staff. And
Wow.
so, and we started that just 2 years ago. He came out of it from a sports medicine background. I came out from family medicine. So
Hmm.
our practice is unique. We kind of focus on musculoskeletal issues, obviously, from his background. We do some regenerative medicine. So, if you've ever heard of stem cell injections, PRP
Hmm.
injections, that's a big part of our practice. But then there's a whole nother part that's lifestyle medicine and that's specialized programming to promote people's health and wellness. And one area that I'm heavily involved in is our healthcare worker wellness program. So we
Yeah.
work with healthcare workers that are burned out, and we try to take a holistic approach and really get at things from body, mind, spirit dimensions.
And I know this is something that we see in the news quite a bit around healthcare workers and either the shortage of healthcare workers or how challenging that has been, especially over these last few years. How are you seeing that in your world today with the patients that you have? Do you see that getting better, about the same? It's not like COVID has really gone away and that's been the primary stressor, but we had this trifecta of different, we had the RSV, COVID, flu, all hit within these last couple of months. What does it look like from your practice?
So we're seeing people that are still working in the system,
Yep.
and their experience is becoming more and more exhaustion is
Yeah.
present for them, and things are not changing. And while the pandemic has somewhat lessened from its severity of deaths, et cetera, the system hasn't changed. The number of hours required hasn't changed. And so people are feeling it just as much now as they were before. And and it's hard to navigate because this is kind of how the feeling is this is how it's going to be going forward.
Right.
And it's an exhausting place for them to be.
Yeah. There's no light at the end of that tunnel of exhaustion.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep. Wow. So if I remember from previous conversations we've had, the musculoskeletal stuff. I have a family member who really needs a new knee and is resistant to that. And I was just like, well, maybe we could just bring you to Karen and she can inject you with things. And so far, no takers, but we'll see if I can get them over the line there. Um, well, so happy to have you here, Karen. Thanks for joining us again. Like I think I mentioned earlier, we talked about quiet quitting last year, and just for frame of reference, whenever this goes live, this is December 30th, 2022. So we're rounding the corner here of a very interesting year. Mid-year, we were talking about quiet quitting and how hard it was to get people hired, and how we had employers who just couldn't find people, and people who were looking were having a hard time getting through systems. We just had a really interesting few months of people losing jobs, and I'm in the tech industry. I saw a lot of it there, but across the board, with everyone being concerned about a potential recession in 2023, lots of companies are pumping the brakes and either freezing jobs, making some structural changes, and in a lot of cases that ends up impacting individuals and their roles. So that's been in the news quite a bit. I've seen that in my network of friends, and seeing folks that are out there looking. How has that manifested at all with your folks that you're working with, or are you just seeing it more kind of from a distance?
Probably because so much is needed in healthcare,
Yeah,
that population of people, they're not so much losing employment right now. Um,
yeah,
but we are seeing it in some of our other patients in the practice.
yeah,
And, so it is there. In the healthcare population, it tends to be more that the job is getting too much, or the toxicity is too much for people, and they feel like they have to leave, or their health is at risk.
yeah,
And so we're seeing people making the hard choice to quit or to
yeah.
retire early. Um,
Right, right.
so
Okay. Well, this I'd say this topic is a sensitive one and an important one. I think people who are impacted by a job loss come from all different parts of the journey. If they've either been in a role for a few or for a short time and this has impacted them, or on the other side of that spectrum, they might be at one company for 30 years. It's the only company they've ever known, and now they're looking at the road ahead, wondering how do I even process what just happened to me, much less what my next step is, right? So I think more about the people who are who've been more disrupted and have been just I can't think of the word, just gobsmacked, gobsmacked
right.
by this the rug being pulled out for them, so to speak. I mean, a lot of companies give severance and benefits and all that, but it's still a big deal to process. So how would you? We talked a little bit about this offline. Like, what kind of advice would you give folks who are may have just gotten that news, or they're sitting at home trying to figure out what they're going to do going forward? Got any advice for folks?
Yeah. So um, I would say that it's really a process. And
Yeah,
so when people have that happen to them, again, like you said, it depends upon, it could be that they've only had a short time job, or it could be
yeah,
30 years. It also depends on, did they absolutely love their job and that was
right.
how they had meaning and purpose, versus it didn't really matter. It was a paycheck, so all of those factors play in. But that being said, there's still some very common emotions that happen. And I would say there's initial phase of shock and overwhelm, especially if
Yeah,
it was even if it's anticipated. Still, when the shock comes, that can lead to that feeling of overwhelm.
yeah,
But there's also some deeper feelings that can come up: betrayal, hurt, anger, resentment, and I would say, even when we say job loss, loss implies grief,
right.
and a lot of times we may not think that we have grieving as part of our process, but any job change, even a job change, there's some grief that it can be thrown in the mix there.
Yeah.
And so these are what I would call, like, sometimes you want to label them positive or negative emotions, etc. I like to look at it like all emotions are just part of our human experience. And so instead of like a negative emotion, it's really more of a hard emotion. It's really hard to deal with grief or hurt or anger or sadness. We don't like to spend a lot of time in those. We can also move towards, after that first initial shock,
Mhm.
then oftentimes we move into fear, panic, stress,
Right.
uncertainty, all of that. And those are also hard emotions to deal with. And so just acknowledging, the first part for me is being able to just name the emotions and
Right.
to be understanding that you could go on a roller coaster and you can have four or five happening all at one time. And
Right.
that is overwhelming for some folks,
Sure.
for many of us.
And especially if you are someone who is the breadwinner, used to be accustomed to being in a position of control, or providing, this is, and depending on how you're wired, lots of people identify who they are by their job. I mean, you mentioned that earlier. It could be just I have a job, I don't care, it's a paycheck, whatever, I'll find another one. So there are others who are just, this is what I do. It makes me come alive. It's my spark of joy, right? And that's a much more challenging emotion to process, the loss of that.
Right.
Where it's easy to say that from our comfortable distance here, but if it and easy to give that advice of that's not the only thing in your life that matters, right?
Right. And
But getting through that initial shock is important.
right. And also just what you said, like you actually named step two, in the
Yeah,
process that I see. And in the first step with those really hard emotions, you're actually put in a fight or flight response. You're in
yeah,
danger. And
yeah,
so as your body, you don't have a earned income and you're concerned about, your family, all of those things. And so it kicks you into that fight or flight or freeze mode.
yep,
And what that does is that can shut down your processing for thinking outside the box and being able to see your life as bigger uh, than the job that's there. And so for me, the first step is to really name those emotions, walk around in them, and be able to process them with someone. And a
yep,
lot of times when you first lose your job, there's almost a sense of I don't want people to know, or oh, I have this handled. I need to be strong in this scenario. And
right,
in reality, you're not going to get moving through to some of the other stages if you just deny that. And so even being able to talk to a friend, family, coach, and just be real honest. This is what I'm feeling right now.
yep,
Naming it gets it outside of ourselves, and then that can take on less energy. And then once that settles a little bit, then you can move on to saying, okay, how do I look at my job in relation to who I am? And what
right,
are some of my other roles? And can you focus a little bit more on some of those while you're still hopefully looking for a job, but to embrace some of the other roles so that you broaden your identity.
right. And we've talked about this in other podcast episodes around determining, it sounds a little corny, but who you are and what you want, right? Before you even go out and start dusting off your resume. I've worked with some career coaches who have come on and chatted with us, and they have people that come to them and say, I just need a resume. I just need to go. I have that job there that I want. Do my resume for me. And they have to pump the brakes a little bit on those types of conversations to make sure, hey, you have this break here. This is actually a gift where you're not just on this treadmill for years and years. You have a break to say, do I want to still work in an office, or do I want to drive a tractor? Right? It's
Right.
so or something in the middle. So it's getting out of that fight or flight mode you talked about, Karen, where you just take a step back, take care of yourself, talk to other people. It's amazing too how much help and care is out there for free just in your network. Even just putting that little doodad on your LinkedIn profiles that says open to work, people just come out of the woodwork. Networking groups are everywhere. So I'm getting a little tactical on moving to the next thing, but there's still a little more processing ahead of that I probably skipped through. So if you have anything else there to share, Karen, in the energy and the processing and the state of mind.
Right. You had a great point of you have this extra time.
Yep.
And what sometimes happens is there's almost a panic, frenetic searching for, I got to fill that job right away. And so,
Yeah. I've got to plug that hole. Yeah.
right, exactly.
Yeah.
When in reality, you're in that panic mode and that's not a very creative space. And so even we sometimes will recommend to patients movement is a really important thing to do. And so if you're going to be thinking about, what values do I want in my next job, or even processing some of what's going on with these emotions, to go out for an hour walk and spend the first 30 minutes processing what emotions are going on with me, what's
Right.
going on. And then the last 30 minutes is just enjoying the view, the workout, etc., letting go some of that and sinking into some gratitude for what are the gifts you do have. Sometimes some of that, balancing the stress of what's going on with a whole piece of gratitude, that puts you into a different part of your brain that
Yep.
has the more creative piece to it. But when someone's right in the middle of a job loss, sometimes all they can feel is those hard emotions. And so adding movement, whether it's biking, walking, running, etc., that can help move things. And so that's important to do. And usually there's some time to do it because, again, you're not going into an office every day. And so
Right.
putting that in is a really important piece. It may sound like, really, I don't know about that, but it can really be transformative. And especially if you're in those sad and uh, mourning and grief type things, this can move you out of that.
Right.
Uh, so that's just one area. As you're processing, there's another layer that goes deeper. After you kind of acknowledge some of these emotions, take a little deeper look at, what is my view about who I am and what I do. Then as you kind of move forward into processing a little bit further, where you're starting to say, how do I go forward? How do I move through this? Sometimes that's a time period when our saboteurs, our inner dialogue, really come out and can play havoc in where
Right.
you're at emotionally. And so, sometimes people are feeling not enough. I like to say not enoughness is,
Right.
it's a thing. And they might be impatient at how long it's taking. They might feel hopeless. And so the deeper piece is, what messages is my inner dialogue giving me? And so are those messages really true? And most of the time, our saboteurs are really acting up, that judge part of us that says, oh, you're not enough, you didn't do enough. Well, is that really true? And
Right.
so that piece of it, to really look at the truth of those statements and say, yeah, that's not really true. I lost my job because they had to downsize. It's not because of I am not enough. And so calling into question some of those messages is kind of a deeper level as you're going along. You can't usually do that right away,
Sure.
but it helps later on in the process.
Yep. Yep. Yeah. And the saboteurs is something we bring up quite a bit in coaching. Even on a regular day, our saboteurs are out there trying to kneecap us for one reason or another. And so when a job loss happens, that's just everything turned up to 11, right?
Right.
So being able to to take a step back from your saboteurs and um, it's hard to be objective, right? But as you get more removed from it and you're processing that, being able to build that narrative around, well, here's what happened, and or even if there was something you took a lesson from it, or you realize, hey, I need XYZ skill. I don't have that. If I'm going to make myself, this is going into another podcast we have on deck for talking about the recession, and if you're in a role that is vulnerable to potentially being downsized, can I do some additional work to get some skills, get some training, develop a capability I didn't have before, so that this won't happen to me again, right?
Right.
And that's when you're out of that shock period, and you're starting to be a little more strategic around, okay, what's next? How can I not have this happen again? And how am I going to get into something that will, if my last job was a slog, how can I be more deliberate about the type of role I go after?
Right. Yeah. It's really taken it's almost like widening the lens. And so when you're first in that first initial phase, all you can see is the immediate moment, and
Yeah.
to be able to kind of get that meta view and start to take that lens wider and look at things a little bit differently with a different perspective. But again, you can't do that when you're in the fight or flight phase.
Right.
And so getting out of that is really key in the process. And
Yeah.
one of the exercises I've done with a few people is, once they're a little bit further along, to be able to say, okay, take a look at your whole work life, starting from when you were a kid,
Right.
and just name all the jobs that you've had, mowing grass and babysitting and moving up the chain, and most people have had quite a few changes as they grow older. And so I like people that get a look at that and say, each one of those jobs was appropriate for your phase of life at that time
Right.
frame. And now you're in another transition. And so to see it not as like such a catastrophe, although there may be very serious consequences, but to see it as an opportunity for a different choice. And what does my life look like right now? And what do I want to move towards? And I have this opportunity to make it happen.
Right. Right. What about you're a physician, so from a self-care perspective, some of the reading I've done around this is find ways to take care of yourself, eating, sleeping, exercise, and how powerful that is from even just recovery, from a recovery perspective. Can you say more about that?
Right. The biggest thing that happens with stress of any kind,
Yeah.
like I said, it stimulates that fight or flight response, which really kicks into gear your sympathetic nervous system, and that can play havoc with your overall health in the long term. And so, what starts to get affected? Your sleep. Usually, people sleep poorly when under stress, and sleep is a key for wellness across the board. And so
Yeah.
being able to maximize your sleep, and how do you do that? Well, each person is different, and um, there's a whole specialty that even looks at that. But at least for yourself, addressing sleep and not burning the midnight oil, etc. But sleep is really important. Movement, as I said, so getting some sort of physical activity in a day, and it doesn't have to be necessarily a cardio piece. It could be some
Right.
stretching. It could be something very simple, but putting yourself in tune with your body, that takes you out of the stress response. And that's what's really important. Um, and then obviously diet. Sometimes people will move towards the comfort foods, and
Yes.
we all tend to do
Yeah.
that.
I
And
I
yes,
eat
me
my
too.
feelings. Yeah.
Yep, absolutely. And so can you balance that and say, you know what,
Yeah.
I need some of that, but can I, you know, also include the things that I know are good for me? Um, and yeah, it's definitely looking at all aspects. But I would also add in connection, and relationship, which
Yeah.
sometimes people don't think about. And they, like I said before, they tend to isolate when something bad happens. Or there's an added dynamic. If somebody loses their job and is let go, their coworkers, they don't quite know how to be present to them. And so sometimes they end up um, not reaching out because they don't know
Yeah.
how, and they don't want to make the person feel worse.
Right.
They just don't know how to do it. And so then the person feels even more isolated. But connectivity is really key for how we handle stress and how we handle these emotions. And so I encourage people, hey, they're not going to know how to reach out to you, your former colleagues. So go ahead and reach out to them and say, hey, I would really appreciate still being connected with you. So, can we get together outside of work and just maintain a connection, or just,
Right.
kind of set the stage for how you would like your colleagues and friends and what you need. And to be able to say, I really need some connection with you all because I'm used to seeing you every day and now that's not happening. So, um, I just encourage that piece of it. And then also whatever relieves somebody's stress. For someone that plays music, put some time in your day where you're doing those things that you enjoyed before,
Yeah.
maybe didn't have time for. All of those things put us in a better state, and it helps us move through that space.
And would you think, I mean, there are folks like you and your practice. There's therapy. Do you see that as, is there, like, what is the threshold for going from, hey, managing this within what I can control, and when you should start reaching out to others for help if it's you're having serious struggles?
I'm a little biased.
Yeah.
So uh, in our practice, both my partner and I are trained medical acupuncturists.
Mm.
And so we deal a lot with interacting with the nervous system and calming down an upregulated nervous system. And so I would encourage people, whether it's massage, whether it's acupuncture, et cetera, that all of us are upregulated with stress, and especially more so with the job loss. And so
Yeah.
I have a very low threshold for reaching out for all kinds of things that can help the process. And I think oftentimes what some people need is they may not have any sort of clinical diagnosis of anything,
Hmm.
and so they may not need therapy or mental health, work in that dimension. But from like a coaching standpoint, from interaction with physician standpoint, a lot of times people just need to know what is normal, and
Yeah.
they're in new territory, and they don't know that this overwhelming sense of emotions, that these are actually normal for what they're going through. And so a lot of times people need reassurance and then ongoing support,
Right.
someone that they can come into and give an update on, that's not in their direct circle necessarily. And so I encourage people to reach out early in the process.
Yeah. Okay. Yep. And yeah, I mean, just having spoken with folks throughout my network that have gone through this journey in the past and fairly recently, I mean, it's fairly traumatic, and especially for folks that may have never had to deal with this kind of loss before. They may just not have the tools or the network or the just the or the understanding of where to go
Right.
to process this. So this is everything that you've laid out here is super helpful. And I think one of the reasons we started Jessel was because of what we were seeing out there around the challenges of just finding a job, even in an environment with extremely low unemployment. And it's very easy to just spend an entire night applying to 100 jobs at once. So the advice I'd have is to pace yourself, take your time to process what happened, to not ruminate too much on the past, and really think about what's next in the future, and what you want. before you start applying to every job you see, right?
Right,
Which is
right.
it's, again, easy to say, hard to do when you're reeling from that loss of trying to figure out how you're going to pay bills and that sort of thing. But if you do have some a grace period to really think hard, and you've got some wiggle room, take that as a gift. Take that time to see your family, play some video games, read some books, go for those walks you're talking about. Take advantage of that break, because so many of us just go from job to job to job to job and don't get those breaks. So that's, on one hand, it can be incredibly disruptive, but then it's also it could be a gift that you wouldn't otherwise have gotten, to just take some time and be you.
Absolutely. And even just knowing that um, taking those breaks and doing those things that bring joy in life, even if you don't quite feel like it, it's
Yeah.
still what you need in order to be more creative. And so it's actually part of the process. And we sometimes have to give ourselves permission to engage in those activities and not be 100%. I have to be out pounding the pavement
Right.
to get that job, to actually see the self-care aspect as incredibly important so that the other things can fall into place and not to neglect it. Yeah.
Mm. And I gotta say, Karen, have never gotten acupuncture, but as we've continued to chat in other conversations, it's moving farther and farther up the list of things I've got to try out.
You know, believe it or not, it's very relaxing. People think,
Yeah.
oh my goodness, using needles, etc. But we actually interact and we're able to kick on the relaxation response. And so it really downregulates a system that's upregulated. And we find it in all our healthcare workers that we do our burnout program for,
Yeah.
acupuncture is part of the process. And for them, gosh, you get to lay there for 20 minutes under a heat lamp with the relaxation response kicking in,
Yeah.
that helps them get through to make whatever steps they need to make. So
Well,
yeah.
that sounds so much more alluring than just sitting on my phone and scrolling through the news.
Right, right.
Stress just goes higher and higher.
It does.
Um, cool. Well, we're coming up on time here, Karen. Loved the conversation. So grateful for you coming to chat with us and share your insight and wisdom here. Anything you want to leave folks with as we close?
Just to be aware that the emotions that you are feeling are all natural, and your journey is going to be very different than someone else with the same type of loss, and that your choices to move forward really do need to focus on some self-care choices, and to see that as that's a way that will help me to be more creative and to make choices that will bring me towards whatever that next job might be, and to not see it as well, I have all this extra time, I guess I should put 100% towards the job part. That's part of it, but to really focus on that piece of dealing with emotions, naming them, moving forward, and then embracing that unknown dimension in front of you, that this is just another chapter of your life and you get to write it.
Yep. So powerful. Love that. Karen, if people want to talk to you and learn more from you, I know you're in Erie, Pennsylvania. It sounds like you do a lot of in-person care. Do you also do any kind of virtual engagements with patients?
So we do some, but you'd have to be in the state of Pennsylvania for us to do,
Aha.
that type of thing. But that being said, my partner and I also do webinars
Okay.
that we advertise on our website. And once people get connected to us, then we send out information that here's the next integrative medicine, webinar that we're hosting.
Great.
We just
Okay.
did two in October and November on soulfulness and health. And we have some more up and coming. So our website is the best place for people to get in
Awesome.
touch.
Okay,
So
so for the lucky Pennsylvanians that can drive to your office, you're open for business there, but
yes,
people can also see you from all over the world through your webinar. So
yes.
that's great to know.
Yeah.
All right, awesome. We'll post the link here too, so people can easily find it.
Wonderful.
Well, thank you so much for the time, Karen. Happy New Year, a day ahead of time here. Thanks for closing out 2022 with us, and really enjoyed the partnership this year with our Jessel podcast.
I've enjoyed being a part of it, and I love the messages that you do on Jessel. So thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, Karen. Take care, everybody.
All right, we'll see ya.